the cost of dying, end of life, when your life ends. And I know that's a difficult conversation for a lot of people to have because, listen, nobody wants to die. Unfortunately, everybody will die, right? I always say there's only two guarantees in this life, and that's change and death. And since death is one of those guarantees, just like anything else, there's a marketplace for that. The people's voice. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the people's voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the people's voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. Greatly appreciated. Today we want to talk about cost, right? Because I know that in the current economic climate that we're in, cost for everything has increased greatly. And, that is a topic of conversation that is on the minds of everyone. And one of the costs that continues to increase and has been a cost that unfortunately will impact all of us at some point is the cost of dying. And I said that correctly, the cost of dying, end of life, when your life ends. And I know that's a difficult conversation for a lot of people to have because, listen, nobody wants to die. Unfortunately, everybody will die, right? I always say there's only two guarantees in this life, and that's change and death. And since death is one of those guarantees, just like anything else, there's a marketplace for that, and there's a cost to, unfortunately, when your life comes to an end, for your body and your memory to be properly put to rest. And with that, there's a cost for that. So today I want to talk about the cost of dying. And it's not I guess we need to first break down some of the stereotypes. This is not I know, some people may say, well, this is very morbid, things of that nature. We need to get over that, unfortunately. That's one of the stigmas that are associated with this particular topic, which is one of the reasons why many times people are not properly prepared to deal with the cost of this because nobody wants to discuss it. But it needs to be discussed. So, and as all of you know who listen to the podcast, the purpose of this podcast is to bring these type of subjects to light, or at least shed additional light on them, because like I say every week, there's always research being done on these topics, but I just don't feel like they get enough light shed on them. And this is one of those topics that I want to discuss today. So the cost of dying. Now, I usually started off with a definition, but I think in this case, everyone understands, the cost of dying. This is the cost I should say the term. This is when your life ends, or your loved one life ends, and depending on your belief system, religion, faith system, or just your philosophies of what should be done once life ends, you will then have to incorporate these costs in order to properly support those philosophies or beliefs that you have. So the cost of dying is just that. It's when you or your loved one passes away, and then there are costs that have to be incurred to properly, or to not properly, but to, again, to support how that person or how you want the end of your life to be represented, celebrated, things of that nature. So, one of the things I first wanted to look up was, first of all, what is the actual cost, right? Because there are different aspects when it comes to the cost of dying. So, I wanted to first look up what is the cost of burial, right? Because at least, there are different forms of burial, obviously, around the world. Typically, in the United States, the form of burial is casket, funeral home, then, buried into cemetery. That's, typically the process, or, depending on what part of the country you're in, there are still many areas of the country that have burial sites like on the land of the family that owned it. I mean, if you travel through the country, for those of you who have had that opportunity, especially as you kind of get towards more of the rural areas, there are literally burial sites on the grounds that people still live at. But that's a whole nother conversation. So I wanted to focus on what is the initial cost. So first of all, and I'm reading here from the National Federation of National Funeral Directors Association. And they gave what the average cost is so far. And again, this is here in the United States. I'm talking about here in the United States. So I'm going to read directly. It says, according to the 2021 National Funeral Directors Association, the median cost of a funeral has increased by 6.6% over the past 5 years. So the median cost of a funeral right now is $7,848. Again, that's the median. The median cost of a funeral with cremation has increased over 11%. And now that cost is about $6,900. So basically, the two different costs, it's about, almost $800 difference, $7,800 for a funeral, casket, cemetery, cremation, $6,900. So that's, $900 difference. So those are the basic costs. And the reason why I'm emphasizing that is because it's not just funeral cost, right? And unfortunately, those who have dealt with this, and I've dealt with this personally, I've mentioned it, here on the podcast. My father passed away. This was 20 years ago now, but even in that situation, and he was very meticulous about having things in place so us, the family, would not have to incur any substantial financial loss by dealing with his passing, right? But I've dealt with it, so I understand the process, is what I'm trying to say. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of talk about this today, because preparation is key. And, acknowledging it first, in my opinion, is the first way to kind of curtail some of the cost, or at least be prepared for it when it comes up. But as you guys know, I'll talk about solutions and recommendations towards the end. So the initial cost, or the median cost, basically in the United States, to have a cremation or a burial is about $7,800 for a burial and $6,900 for a cremation. Now, that again is just the burial cost, right? That's funeral home, embalming, casket. Well, I don't even think the casket is involved in that. I got to review that. But those are the initial costs. But then on top of that, you have what they call the end of life expenses. And the end of life expenses are the moments leading up to the time a person passes away. Now, again, in these subjects or in these examples, we're not talking about, the person that just unfortunately, suddenly passes away in a car accident or, something that was unexpected, right? Not to say that those costs are still the same, right? You still have to pay the burial costs and things of that nature, but a lot of the end of life expenses are more associated with people that are sick, people that are up in age, and that period from when they're in a hospital or they're in hospice or they're in a funeral, an elderly home, a senior home, that cost leading up to the burial time is also incorporated in the cost of dying. And so it says here that, and this was from the National Bureau of Economic Research, it says that on average, out of pocket costs for end of life is about $11,600. So now you take that number that I just said was the average in terms of burial costs, right? It's like 7,800 for funerals, for burials and caskets, and then 6,900 for cremation. And then you take that number and you put it on the end of life medical cost or the end of life expenses. You're now looking at about, $18,000, $19,000. It gets very expensive. And, these costs are, as I read, are not going down, right? They're only going up. These are also the circumstances of inflation, right? This is a business. And I'm not even going to get into the numbers in terms of the industry itself. It's a huge industry that many people are trying to get into because, and again, I know this is a sensitive subject, so that's why I'm kind of hesitating as I'm speaking, but the industry itself is very lucrative, and there are many people trying to get into it because, unfortunately, as I said in the beginning, one of the guarantees in life is death. And a lot of these funeral homes, and there's private equity companies that are involved in a lot of these, they see the business model, unfortunately. And we live in a capitalist society, so you're going to have those type of companies out there. Not to say there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a capitalist, so I don't have a problem saying that at all. And I understand if there's a business model, then you have to, if you have a plan to address that, then that's what you have to do. So let me get back. So we have the initial burial costs, right? Then we have the end of life costs. So you take those two costs, now you're at $18,000. And a lot of these expenses, like I said before, a lot of times many people don't incorporate this because we are so just so against the acknowledgement of life ending, right? And I understand that. I completely understand it, but at the same time, in order to be prepared, especially for families, it has to be discussed and a plan has to be put in place. So those are the costs. So then the next thing I wanted to do was to kind of see, what is the what states, right? I wanted to break it down into what states does it cost, or what states have the highest cost when it comes to the cost of dying, because this is what this is about. And so I did some research. I found an article on Yahoo Finance. Again, big money. So, a lot of this information kind of sits on these type of sites. And they had a breakdown of each state in terms of what the cost of dying is. And actually, they got their list from gobankingrates.com. And, again, I like to give credit because I'm doing the research. Obviously, a lot of these sites have already done the research to provide me the information. So that's why I, shout out the different sites and places that I get the information. This is not paid. I'm not, they're not giving me any money. It's not paid endorsement, but I just like to point that out. So they broke it down by state in terms of what the cost is to die in each state. And they did all 50 states. And I won't go through all 50, but I can tell you the least expensive state in terms of the lowest cost to deal with death or dying is Mississippi. So Mississippi came in at about $18,500. And basically the average funeral expense in Mississippi is $6,600. The end of life cost, those are the medical costs, housing costs, senior care costs, things of that nature, hospice, was $11,800. So they came in at $18,500 on average, and that is the lowest amount in terms of the 50 states. Some of the other lower states, you also had Arkansas and Missouri and New Mexico. They were all pretty much in that $18,000 range. Then when you start getting towards the middle of the pack, you start looking at, somewhere around Florida, the cost of dying, or the cost of, I'm trying to, change the wording, but it is what it is. The cost of dying in Florida on average is about $2,100. And again, that incorporates the average funeral expenses, and then also incorporates the end of life cost. And then in that middle pack, you have you also have Arizona at $20,000. You have Utah at pretty much $21,000, and then you have Colorado at $22,000. So that middle pack is somewhere between $20,000 and $22,000. That first initial, the cheapest is somewhere between $18,000 and $19,000, and then you get into your most expensive states. And interestingly enough, a few of these states I was a little like, wow, I didn't even consider those states. And these are the top 10, and I want to kind of expand a little bit on the top 10. So first, you have Rhode Island coming in at $25,000 for the cost to pay if the cost of dying, $25,000. Now, on average, funeral expenses in Rhode Island are $9,000, and then you have your end of life costs, which are about $16,000. Very expensive. So just think about that for a second. You have a person that's passed away in your family, or I keep saying other people, but this also has a lot to do with estate planning and things of that nature. But there's death that has occurred in your family or is occurring in your family, right? There's a sickness. Maybe there's an elderly parent or elderly grandparent, or even a sick child. I mean, as unfortunately, death has no, death does not discriminate. So now you're dealing with this, right? You're first dealing with $16,000 of what they call, again, end of life costs, medical costs, hospital costs. If the individual is, in a state that they have to be taken care of for quite some time, or it can be, unfortunately, a situation where someone passes away and maybe there was a surgery to try to, there's a lot that goes on, but $16,000 in Rhode Island, and then you put on top of that the funeral cost of $9,000. That puts you at $25,000. So that was, Rhode Island was number 10. Number 9 was New Jersey. New Jersey was at $26,000. Connecticut 8 at $27,000. Maryland $27,000. Now in Maryland, the average funeral expense is $10,000. Okay. So again, Mississippi was at average cost for funeral expenses was $6,600. Maryland, you're talking about $10,000 for funeral costs. Really, really expensive. Again, this is why I wanted to do this particular podcast, because many people are unprepared to deal with this type of cost because there's such a denial about death. Again, I don't personally feel it's a morbid conversation. I personally feel that, it is the guarantee of life. And if you can prepare for it when you can't always prepare for it. But in these situations, when you're dealing with this type of cost, and again, this goes back to philosophies and beliefs and religion and things of that nature, how your culture, the culture that you're in, and how you think things should be handled once a death occurs, obviously will have a huge impact on costs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that here in a second. So Maryland was at $27,000 in terms of total death cost of death cost, or cost of dying cost was $27,000. You have Alaska at number 6 at 27, Massachusetts at 28, Oregon. So these are the kind of the ones that got me. I was like, why is it so expensive in Alaska? And obviously Alaska is a very a state that contributes a lot, which people don't know, to the American economy, but I won't get into that conversation. But I just thought, for some reason, you think Alaska, you're like, well, but $27,000, almost $28,000 for the cost of dying in Alaska. Then in Massachusetts, 28. Oregon, again, one of those states, that's, you're thinking it's way out west. It's beaver country, like what? But again, $28,000. And then you have the top 3 are probably the ones that are not as surprising. You have New York, which I was surprised that was number 3. I thought New York would be number 1. New York is the 3rd state in terms of the highest cost of dying. That's at $29,000. In New York, funeral expenses are $10,700 on average, and then you have almost $19,000 of end of life costs. California, $32,000. Average funeral expenses are about $11,700. End of life costs are $20,000. So once again, it even costs money to die. Okay, that's that. Put that statement out there. And then last, it was Hawaii. Hawaii was number 1 in terms of the cost of dying. Average funeral expense $14,900. Average end of life medical cost, or end of life cost, $26,000. $41,000. So again, the purpose of this is to A, bring awareness, B, get people to start thinking about this. Again, I know I want to live forever, but I know I'm not. I know the people that are in my family are not. And so we have to get prepared. And how you get prepared is through information, right? Information, and then applying the information once you receive it. So this is why I wanted to do this particular podcast. And a lot of this was spurred on. There's a site called empathy.com. They did a report earlier this year regarding the cost of dying. And they pretty much, broke it down in terms of average for all of the states here in the United States. One of the things that they highlighted in their report, which I thought goes, undiscussed as well, is that the effects that this has on family members, right? Because when a loss is occurred in the family, and the family members are now responsible to deal with it, and if there is not proper planning involved, it really wreaks havoc because you're already dealing with the aspect in terms of mourning, but then you're dealing with the business of dying, which can, exacerbate the emotions of individuals. So one of the things that they pointed out is that it says 52% of people surveyed, and they kind of did a survey in terms of their report, that 52% of people said dealing with the loss negatively impacted their performance at work. And you can imagine if you're now thrusted into having to make calls and talk to lawyers and talk to medical professionals, the funeral stuff, it can really impact what happens to you during that period as someone who's dealing with the loss of a family member. Now they say on average that the expense that families occur from the death of a loved one is about $12,000. And again, a lot of this cost has to do with if there are not insurances in place, if there wasn't proper planning before, to make sure that there were available funds, if inherited funds have to be diverted towards debt that may have been occurred, sale of a house, is so many things. But they say on average, a lot of family members deal with about $12,000 worth of expenses as a result of dealing with the loss of a family member. Now, here's the thing the two things that I wanted to point out. Number one, in this report, and this is from empathy.com, they say that on average, after a person passes away, dealing with the individual's affairs can take anywhere from 13 to 20 months to get all of their affairs in order. Because again, someone passes away, there might be a situation where that individual has assets and estate that you have to deal with. So these are things that commonly may go under discussed until that moment occurs. So it says here on average that it takes somewhere between 13 to 20 months to deal with all of the affairs once a person passes along. And then last but not least, the other thing that they mentioned here is that in terms of health, and we talked a little bit about job performance, but they say in terms of health, 57% say they have experienced clinical or psychological symptoms of stress, and the average person suffered from all three symptoms, physical, psychological, and clinical. So it is so important to deal with this as soon as possible. Again, you can't predict death. Not everyone, lives to 80, 90 years old. Not everyone, has the financial means to plan for this. But the more that you can do up front, the less it will cost down the road. And again, this is the cost of dying. Recommendations. So as always, I like to give recommendations. Now, here was one recommendation that is being done to kind of curtail the cost of living, and it's called natural burials. And this is a clip that I'm going to play here from an audio clip that I'm going to play here from WLIX in Michigan, and they did a report on natural burials. So I want you guys to kind of take a listen to this, and this is one suggestion.
Jordan explains.
A new study found a 6% increase in Americans who are planning a natural burial instead of a traditional one.
It's a simple and sustainable burial option, which involves placing the body directly in the ground without embalming and just in an organic cotton shroud so that the body can naturally decompose.
Now, I know people hear that and they go, no way. That's not something that I would do for myself or my family members. Let me be very clear. But again, because the costs have gotten so out, I don't want to say out of hand, but since the costs have increased so much, people are looking for alternatives to having to deal with this. And that is one of the suggestions that is being talked about in terms of getting around the initial cost. Now, again, that doesn't have anything to do with the effects on the end of life cost, as we discussed, thoroughly here on this podcast. But to kind of get around the funeral expenses and things of that nature, people are looking for alternatives to kind of get around that, and natural burials is one of them. Now, they go into other recommendations. I wasn't comfortable playing that, but that is just one suggestion. But in terms of dealing with it, making sure that from a cost standpoint, we're doing everything that we need to do. First of all, there are different options. There's a payable on death account that you could set up. You could put funds to the side for funerals, and then once you pass away, you put somebody's name on it. They know that once the death certificate is presented to the bank, that money then goes to that person, and that money doesn't have to go through probate. It goes directly to the individual who is responsible for handling all of your affairs, and then there are funds available, and they can deal with the necessary costs as directed. Obviously, savings account, putting money away. If you want to set up a separate savings account for a loved one, or you have an elderly parent, or just in general for yourself, there's always ways to do that as well. You can give rights to those that you, again, dedicate as part of your survivorship, and then they can have access to those funds. Borrowing, which a lot of times many people unfortunately have to do, because when death does come to individuals, a lot of times many individuals end up using credit cards and things of that nature. I don't suggest that. Again, I prefer the first two methods, having funds available to deal with those type of costs. Obviously, insurance is key. Having some type of life insurance, term life insurance. You can find very low cost insurance to kind of deal with just some of the basic needs in terms of end of life costs and even burial costs. There are other cheaper options. Now, here's another option. I'm not even going to talk about that one, because I already know I wouldn't do it, so I'm not going to suggest it to you. And then the other option, say you can prepay at funeral homes. Now, again, the thing about the prepay at funeral homes, you have to keep in mind that 89% of the nation's funeral homes are locally owned, so they're not part of a larger network. So not all of them can go into a prepaid network where you can prepay services. But again, these are some of the suggestions that are being recommended. Me personally, life insurance is always my number one recommendation. I can tell you personally that, again, when my father passed on, that was definitely one of the ways that we were able to address the cost of his passing, and to deal with any other extensive or any other lingering debts that may have been outstanding that we had to deal with. Which, again, I was in a case where, my father planned for his death, unfortunately, but not everybody has that luxury. So that's why, again, I wanted to do this, to bring some light to it and encourage everyone to, number one, have the conversation and begin the planning process. Do not wait till, unfortunately someone is, in a hospital, in hospice, in a senior home, and then everyone is beginning to scramble because it looks like, the time has come. So that's my number one suggestion. Save, insurance, and those two things should definitely be effective in terms of curtailing some of the cost of dying. So I hope this was enlightening. Again, I know it's a touchy subject. I know it is. And, I put a lot of thought into it before I cracked open the mic, because I know it's a subject that not a lot of people like to discuss. But again, it is a discussion that you must have. And I thoroughly encourage everyone to do so as soon as possible. Again, in this life, there are only two guarantees, and that's change and death. And it's hard to prepare for change, and it's hard to prepare for death. But if you have some type of preparation, then you can manage them a little bit better. So that's my time for today. Please do me a favor. If this podcast is giving you information, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Constructive criticism is always well taken by me. Also, do me a favor, subscribe to it. Tell somebody to tell somebody to tell somebody. I'm going to be putting up these videos on YouTube on a more regular basis. I know I was a little bit lackadaisical. Not lackadaisical, but I got busy this summer with other stuff and didn't have time to put up the videos, but I'll be putting them up on a regular basis, usually the day after it premieres on the podcast net on streaming networks. So Apple Podcasts, I'm on Spotify, all the streaming podcasts. You can get the podcast from Spreaker.com as well. But yeah, so do me a favor, like, subscribe, tell somebody to tell somebody to tell somebody. You can hit me up at the socials. I'm at I am Trey Evans on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Trey Be Talking on Instagram. And you can check out the website, Trey Evans. Just Google me, Trey Evans. I have my website as well. You can hit me there. So, as always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the people's voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute. I am Trey Evans, the people's voice.